if I wore a sweater made of this colour, would I just look naked? Hello and welcome to the Crimson Stitchery, a video channel about making all things beautiful and useful. My name is Anushka and you can find me elsewhere online as the Crimson Stitchery, such as on Instagram, on Ravelry. I've recently started a Pinterest account for the Crimson Stitchery, so please find me over there and let me know how it works. I'm open to instruction. I've also been recently working on my website, which is www.thecrimsonstitchery.com. So please feel free to have a little gander, a little look-see around there if it tickles your fancy. And with all that, welcome to the April edition of my making things vlog, my knitting podcast, whatever you want to call it. I'll just start by mentioning what I'm wearing before I forget. It is a yoked t-shirt with a textured yoke. But I made so many changes to this when I knitted it quite a few years ago, I think at least 4 or 5 years ago, that the only thing really that bears any resemblance to the written pattern is the little postage stamp motif, you know, garter stitch squares with an eyelet outline. I just changed everything about the pattern, about how it fit, everything. So I'll put the designer down below and a link to my Ravelry project page if I have one. I don't use Ravelry very often these days. Certainly not to keep track of my projects. There's enough things to keep track of, it feels like. So in this month's episode, I have an exciting announcement because I have a new design coming out, which is really wonderful, that I'm delighted to be sharing with you. And I've also got a couple of whips, works in progress. And at long last, and after many requests by viewers over the years, I'm going to be reading a poem. I discovered a really, really wonderful poem when I attended a seminar held by a poet. So I really, really enjoyed that. And I was one of the people that volunteered their hand to do the reading out loud when that happened. So yeah, I thought that you guys would enjoy hearing that. So do keep watching to the end if you like the sound of my voice. And this month's video is coming to you courtesy of all of my lovely and wonderful supporters over on Patreon, where we have a thriving and bubbly online community, people coming together to support making and sharing and creativity, as well as doing that little bit to help the channel going through monthly membership subscriptions which meet the production costs of the Crimson Stitchery. Thank you so much for your contributions over the last year. My Patreon supporters are really the ones that are keeping the Crimson Stitchery going, and it is really, really, truly appreciated. So if you've been enjoying the Crimson Stitchery and if you've been thinking about maybe signing up to our Patreon for a little while, then do hop over to patreon.com/thecrimsonstitchery to check out what's what and choose the right tier benefit for you. So what's in my knitting basket? I have it on the sofa behind me there, and I'm going to grab it because the other day I spent quite a little while clearing it out, and I found all sorts of nonsense stuffed in here from years ago. You know, we're talking about old magazines, old bits of thread, random buttons, print-offs of patterns that I had just put in there and I'd scribbled all over, and I'd finished it ages ago. You know, we're talking about finished objects from like 3 or 4 years ago. They were all just shoved in the naughty corner at the bottom of the basket, and I cleared it out, and now it really is just full of works in progress. There's some swatches, stuff I want to show you. There's a pink sweater here which the eagle eyes might spot, which needs to be mended. I haven't got around to it yet because there's a little hole. Yeah, so I just did a knitting basket refresh, which I can highly recommend. This is just an old wicker basket from probably the 80s. It was probably like an apple picking basket or something like that. I'm guessing in terms of the design. I'm not sure. Are there any basketry aficionados watching? Chip in. It's got a really nice, satisfying handle to hold, but it's falling apart somewhat with the wrap. I did put a spot of glue down just to hold that in place, but it seems to have just worn off somehow. Yeah, so sadly falling apart, but I don't use it to go frolicking. I don't use it to go frolicking around the fields. It mostly just sits in the corner by the couch, and it just gets lifted up and down by the handle to show you what's inside. And I'll just pick what's right on the top. So I'm picking up a hank of yarn and 2 swatches. So earlier this year I had a little stint of submitting designs to other companies, submitting knitting designs, and I'm delighted to say that I had a couple accepted, and the first one of those is due to be published, and that is the wonderful Hudson West Co, which is a US-based yarn company, very small yarn company, small and independent, and all of the nice things about wool companies that we've grown to love. So Hudson, I guess, is the Hudson Valley on the East Coast. And West refers to the wild, wild West Coast. I'm guessing, I think that the founders are like maybe from either side. So I have designed the Kolsch hat for a collection mood board which took roots and tree roots and kind of creeping vines and stuff like that as the inspiration. And the final photos, as you can see, ended up being photographed in a brewery, which seems like a really, really fun location for a photo shoot for obvious reasons. I think that the atmosphere of like all of the barrels and all of that wood and the warehouses seems really fun, or at least it seems to be quite a rusticy brewery in their photo shoot. I've got to say, there's a lot of breweries in East London. In fact, my friend used to live in a flat which was kind of opposite a kind of an industrial estate that was partly in an industrial estate but had partly been gentrified, if you like, and hosted there were 10 different breweries, and that was the kind of corrugated iron roof kind of warehouse, do you know what I mean? Not the kind of rusticy thing. So that was more of a modern warehouse, but this brewery that they've done their photo shoot in looks absolutely delightful, and they've gone ahead and named all of the designs in the collection after some form of beer. I'm not a huge beer drinker, so yeah, there's only a couple of types that I recognise, and my hat is called Kolsch. So it's a little cabled hat, and Hudson West are fast becoming the yarn company to go to if you love knitting cables. I think that when it comes to designers as well as design houses, you generally have a feeling of what people are about. For instance, Michelle Wong, definitely cables, although I don't think that she's published that many patterns recently, but also Nora Gorn, all about the cables and shapes and textures. And Hudson West are truly going for that corner, and it's absolutely delightful. They always put on gorgeous collections. They have only been going for a few years, but they're really establishing themselves as the yarn company to go to, because their yarn, in fact, displays cables beautifully. They've only got 2 different types of yarn, a 4-ply and a worsted weight yarn. And I'd been really captivated by their photography and their collections and so on for quite a while, and I was really eager to submit to them and delighted when they took my submission. So the Kosh hat centres around lozenge shaped cables. So they're kind of like diamonds. I've got 2 swatches here. This grey one was the original one that I did and submitted to them. So I'll show that to you there. It's got this kind of outlined lozenge, and then it's got this other one that's filled with little mini cables and textures. So I did this swatch in the round, quite a big swatch, as you can see. And then after that, they sent me the yarn to work with. This is just some leftovers here that I've got, and I had to redo the swatch again. So I took that opportunity to experiment a little bit just to see what I could do. So yeah, and that's the yarn, weld, They've got weld and forge, so it's again this like industrial themed naming. And yeah, this is the full ply, and it's just in a like a bleached cream. But to be honest with you, they've got so many nice colours that I think it would be wonderful to knit this hat. And one of the things that I'm really pleased about with this hat is how I achieved the flow from the brim. There's just a 2x2 ribbed brim into the intertwining cable lozenges across the crown. And also you can kind of see it in this finished photo just about. I was really pleased that I achieved this kind of very flower-like decrease at the crown. Into the centre, and of course there's that tiny little pom-pom as well, just the little one. So it's quite slouchy, but it's quite a slouchy fit, and the stitch pattern, you know, it's quite a neat fitting cap, and it needs to be fairly tight so that the fabric can stretch out and open out, because you don't want a saggy hat, right? So yeah, that is Kolsch, and Hudson West were really, really wonderful to work with. Given that I'm in the UK and I had to post the sample to them, it ended up being quite a short lead time. But as I discovered, once you get into the flow of this cable pattern of the hat, it really just it really starts to become very, very satisfying, and you just need a little bit of, you know, concentration, but you can just kind of enjoy being immersed in that cable chart. So there'll be details down below about where you can download the pattern from. So although my brand, if you like, is the Crimson Stitchery, my name is associated with that as well, so that's Anushka, and I'm truly looking forward to seeing people's interpretations of this design. I'm looking forward to seeing your colours. I'm looking forward to seeing the hat being worn in the wild and all of the rest of it. So I hope that you enjoy the design. I'm really satisfied with it. And yeah, let me know how you get on with it. But make sure that you are signed up to my newsletter, in fact, for announcements of this sort, because you'll get the details straight into your inbox if you don't want to miss that pattern being released. This year I have had, I've had a few different plans when it comes to knitting and designing. And whilst my first plan has been to finish the designs that I started last year, I've also been aware of the gaps in my catalogue of knitting designs. I've got about 12 designs as we speak, and they're leaning very heavily towards socks. And I really want to knit more hats. I'd like to do more shawls, and of course, many, many more garment ideas are bubbling away in the back of my mind and the forefront, as always. So it's really nice to be, going forth and working with texture, because that's really my thing, I think. Although the pattern in this hat design is, it's not hard, but it's not, as easy as just some eyelets. I guess I don't want to say that it's like complicated, because I never want to put anybody off if you just want to have a go, if you just want to experiment or just throw yourself into a new technique and push yourself. I'm really all about that. I'm all about improving your knitting skills whilst you're doing it. Even if it means that you have to frog, if you have to rip it out afterwards, I think that, there's no better way than just having a go. And that's kind of why I'm a little bit wary of markers, easy, intermediate, hard, that kind of thing, because yeah, I just think it's what you make of it, and opportunity that you take. But anyway, it's really nice to be playing around with textures and building up that side in my design catalogue, and my original designs that I'm finally making available. And last month's episode, I talked about being really tired and wanting to just knit all of the simple, like really simple projects. And I asked for some recommendations. So thank you very much for everybody who wrote one in the comments of the last video. The comments in my videos are generally a very nice place to be. Everybody is really generous and incredibly respectful. So, if you watch my videos, feel free to have a little scroll down below and maybe chip in if you would like to as well. There's often some really helpful recommendations and resources shared in response to questions. But yeah, I asked for recommendations of simple projects. People gave them to me. And then I decided that actually I was quite tired. I was just quite tired in general. Like I'd met a series of rolling deadlines at uni, and that tiredness went on for quite a while, let me tell you. Anyway, Don't want to dwell on that. But what I decided was that maybe my simple project would be following someone else's pattern. For once, she says, you can tell already where this is going to go, right? On the Patreon account for the Crimson Stitchery, we have a Discord server, which is kind of like a chat room. It's kind of like a private chat room just for patrons, and it's just like a more lively chatting app. You know, I kind of describe it as in between a forum and a kind of WhatsApp kind of group. You can get it on your phone, you can get it on your tablet, you're not restricted to the desktop, and you can respond quite quickly and use emojis and things like that. Put pictures in, links and all of that, which is quite different from like a kind of Ravelry-like forum that's a bit more static. So as part of that, we decided to host a knit-along in the Discord server. This is something that we did quite a bit last year, but I decided to take a break from knit-alongs. And then I just thought, actually, no, it'd be really nice to make something with a group of people. And after some consideration and inspiration from some members posting their finished objects, we decided to do a brioche hat knit-along. And after voting on, after suggesting and voting on favourite patterns, we picked a paid-for pattern and a free one as well. And the paid-for pattern was an Andrea Mowry brioche hat. And I'm just laughing because this year, the Crimson Stitchery seems to be about me breaking down and exploring knitting trends that people have been banging on about for years. So like in February, I had the episode about the mohair and merino and hand-dyed, you know, trend that I explored in my Starlit Night and Bundle of Stars designs. And I was like, of course it's a trend, it's really nice. This is why people are into it. So that made me laugh because I tend to be a person that can spot trends coming. I just, you know, I've always noticed, you know, kind of picked up on styles that start emerging, you know, when people are the first ones to kind of try something, it sort of starts to be popular. I tend to notice. And yeah, and then suddenly you see it and it's everywhere. And then I tend to not really want to do it. This is my personality. And then like after the trend's boiled over, I'm like, okay, maybe I'm ready. Maybe I'm ready to jump in now. You know, it's been like 5 years. More? Who even knows? Anyway, so I finally worked out what brioche is. It's not a cake. Well, it's a type of sweet bread. Just shaking my head. Here it is, right. So I went for the pattern Vintage Prim by Andrea Mowry, which is a brioche hat. Long story short, this is my 4th attempt at the brim, and I'm going to have to rip it out and do a 5th. And the reason for that is the gauge. The gauge. It's way too loose on my head. Like, it's just sitting on my head as it is, and it feels like it's not, it feels like after I wear it a little bit more, it's just going to start stretching out. And for brioche, you know, same thing as I was saying for my cabled ribbed slouchy beanie, the Kolsch hat, you want there to be more negative ease, right? You want it to be much smaller than your head so that it really stretches out and you can make the most of the stitch pattern, which, you know, maybe people will comment and say that it looks fine, but I can look, it's falling down. Do you know what I mean? On my hair. My hair's quite slippery. So yeah, it's just not working out. And the first attempt of doing the brioche stitch, I had to rip out because it looked ugly. Then the second time, then I had to go down a needle size. I went down another needle size. I'm just gonna have to rip it out and take out maybe like 1 inch or 2 inches. 2 inches if I'm feeling extreme. Like at least 1 inch needs to come out, if not 2. That's 2. That's 1. 1 is okay, but maybe 1.5 inches I'm gonna have to take out of stitches. Now, am I using the recommended yarn? No. It's definitely got something to do with why my hat is turning out bigger than hers, but also she doesn't really have great measurements in the pattern. And the most annoying thing is that the swatch, here goes this way around, the swatch, the tension that she asks you to do is given in garter stitch in the round, not in brioche stitch. So you can see I did one load of swatching and then another with a needle size smaller. But garter stitch in the round is a totally different stitch pattern to brioche stitch, brioche rib. So that's kind of annoying. Oh yeah, so the yarns that I'm using are like leftovers from my stash. I've got a 4-ply sock yarn, and it's a superwash sock yarn. It feels a bit squeaky, so I'm holding it with some leftover mohair silk, which obviously is bulking it up slightly, so that's probably contributing, well, definitely is contributing to why my hat is coming out bigger. And then I've got like a heavy 4-ply, probably more like a sport wool. So again, it's a bit, they're both like heavier than maybe your average merino superwash hand dye kind of thing. So that's probably what it is. So you could say it's my fault because I'm substituting yarns. But the fact is that I did the swatch in the pattern in the stitch pattern that the pattern recommended and got gauge. And then when I knit the project, I couldn't get gauge at all because it was a completely different stitch pattern. So my attempt at simple knitting has been a bit frustrating, to be honest with you. And then I find myself back in the boat that I was trying to change, which is whenever I knit other people's patterns, I end up making loads of alterations. For anyone that's wondering about this topic, by the way, or is intrigued by it, I have a whole video series about altering knitting patterns, which begins with a pep talk called Making Clothing to Embrace the Body That You Have, and then goes on to more practical information about alterations, and I'll put a link to it there. If you kind of intrigued by my informational side of my videos, then do explore my video playlists on YouTube. I've tried to organise them a bit more by theme, but also on the crimsonstitchery.com, I've put all of the tutorials on there, and there's a search bar, so you should be able to, you know, have a look for what you are trying to get some guidance on there. And always feel free to make video requests as well. I'll just add them to the spreadsheet, and you know, when I have time, hopefully over the summer, I'm going to try and do a bit more filming. So yeah, that whip was a tale of woe. It wasn't a simple technique, if you like, but it was meant to be a simple experience of just following something along. And you know, I'd kind of thought, oh, Andrea Marie, she's so popular. She's, you know, there's so many people that have knit this pattern. You know, surely this will be a straightforward project to do. And it just, you know, hasn't worked out that way, unfortunately. But there you go, that's that. All right, so the other thing that I've been working on is a sock, tackling my sock yarns like I intended to at the beginning of the year. And after I knit my oregano socks version 2, I knit an orange pair in sport weight yarn. I decided that I'd really like more cabled socks in my wardrobe for cold and chilly days. So I came up with this sock pattern, which is really, really pleasing. So this is an original, and you know, it wasn't fast because of all the cables on tiny yarn and needles, but I'm really satisfied with it. It's just something really pleasing about that with a cable rib. And I've just started the second one, and I'm thinking that I might release it in the autumn, maybe as a sock pattern, but I like to release things in sets. So I have another cabled sock pattern, which, this is a little update actually for people that were watching me last year. I was commissioned to do a sock pattern for a book, but really, unfortunately, the company has folded. So I did get paid, thankfully, but the book's not going to go ahead, which is a real shame. But they've returned the sample to me at least, so maybe I can try and photograph it and release that as a pattern on the Crimson Stitchery. Yeah, it's a real shame, to be honest with you, but I'm going to try and make the most of it. So yeah, that would be 2 cabled socks. So it'd be nice to have a third, wouldn't it? It's always nice to have a little groups of things. Even though I just said that I wanted to do fewer sock patterns. Oh, I don't know. The reason that I have so many sock patterns is because in 2020 I got really into sock designing, and I did 4 patterns, which are all lacy socks intended for warm weather. So I have the warm weather socks collection. And I thought really carefully about sock knitting when it's warmer, both, you know, doing it, you know, as an activity, but also how you really want to wear socks, you know, what kind of socks are really suitable when it's a bit more humid outside, or maybe you want to wear them with socks with sandals, or maybe that you are, you know, walking them to take a little gentle summery hike or a springtime hike. You know, the kind of situations where you still want to wear a knitted sock, but you know, you just don't want it to be so heavy, whereas, you know, cabled socks are literally the opposite of that. And my warm weather socks were all inspired by confectionery and ice lollies and 90s nostalgic brands and things like that. So yeah, actually, if you have any kind of ideas or suggestions about what maybe an autumnal cabled small tiny collection could be about, then please feel free to drop me a comment down below and let me know. I'd really value your input. Okay, the last thing just to talk about briefly is this pile of swatches, because as I said, I had a couple of designs accepted and now I need to crack on with the other one. But as usual, I'm not making things easy, and I've gone for loads of different textured stitch patterns, which I had to swatch in the finished yarn to make sure that it would be suitable, because the final yarn provided was so different from what I swatched with for the submission, which was just what was lying around in my stash, because I wasn't, you know, I'm not in a position to like go out and buy new yarns for it. I just have to use leftovers. But the reason that I'm showing you this is because I would never have chosen this colour, this fawn colour, like a biscuity fawn colour, because I do not like beige. With absolutely no offence meant to people that love beige. You know how people use the word vanilla as an insult for like a little bit safe and dull? Even though obviously vanilla as a flavour is actually like exotic and rich and delicious and blah, blah, blah. Let's not get into that. But do you know, do you see what I'm getting at? You know, beige for me is what does it. And like magnolia coloured walls, just go for white. So that's where I'm at with that. So I got sent this like beige sample skeins to do my sample for this for this pattern design. I'm not going to get into it because, you know, you'll hear about it in due course. And I was like, oh, and then I knit this pile of swatches, and then something happened as I was knitting. I'll just show you this one because this is just the plain stocking stitch swatch. And I was like, oh, actually, there's something about it that looks quite nice on my skin colour. And I'm olive skinned, and I've currently caught the sun because I was sunbathing over the weekend. And weirdly, it actually looked nicer when I was even fairer before I'd done the sunbathing. So yeah, maybe I should compare it like to my untanned skin. But yeah, I was really surprised about that. There's something about it that looks nice. I think maybe offset with, you know, having very dark brown hair and maybe with all of the other strong jewel colours around me. I was like, yeah, there's something about this. So that was a surprise, wasn't it? Like, there was me being really judgmental about boring beige. And then suddenly I'm like, oh, actually, there's something quite attractive in it. So I think there's people that might argue that this is like a soft gold, but look, my watch is like a rose gold. It's not gold, come on. Look at that, it's not. Gold is more, you know, yellow gold is more brash, and there's nothing brash about this colour. It is extremely safe. But yeah, there was something quite comforting about it, and I think with this yarn in particular, it's a type of merino, so it's very light reflective, because it's very, very smooth, and yeah, it's got a little bit of shininess to it. You know, I would probably feel differently. Maybe like this yarn is much more matte. Although still quite shiny, I don't know. Or maybe like more of a Shetland beige. I wouldn't like that. But yeah, there we go. So Just thought that I'd share that anecdote and that pile of swatches. Keep an open mind about colours, because it's possible that you might get surprised even if you thought you were as fixed in your ways as I am. Sometimes I think that maybe this kind of beige colour, I just can't even say the word beige without laughing. And maybe I thought it would suit people who are much more melanated than me, because then it might look like a, you know, like a pleasing contrast colour. Whereas I think something about it, I thought, you know, basically, I have to be careful with like so-called neutrals, because with my olive skin, if they've got the wrong undertone, like if they've got like a pinky or yellowy undertone, they make me look like a corpse. It's not flattering. And when I choose kind of so-called neutrals, it has to be a cold neutral, like a cold grey. Generally is a bit more flattering. I'm speaking in very broad terms because colour and dyeing is an extremely complex situation. But, you know, just sometimes you like love a piece of clothing, or you're drawn to it for a certain colour, and you put it on and you just kind of look a bit weird. I definitely get that with, you know, having an olive skin toned. So yeah, I thought that maybe people that were much darker than me or much fairer than me maybe could pull it off because there was a bit more contrast. And, you know, there is totally the risk that if I hold this there, if I wore a sweater made of this colour, would I just look naked walking? Yeah, I mean, I would, wouldn't I? Look, let's do that. Were you expecting this when you started watching my knitting podcast? Do you know what I mean? If I was walking down the road like that, look, let's stick an arm out, would I just look like a naked? I totally would look like a naked person. It's like when you see girls wearing, I was going to say nude, but that's like, that's not really an accurate, like a kind of nude and buff and tones like that when they refer to a pale peach. Like, you shouldn't say that, right? Because not everybody is that skin colour, right? They're not that pale peach skin colour when they are naked, right? So you shouldn't say that. But like a pale pink, you know, if people wear like a pale pink leggings. I was really confused once. I was looking out of this is a few years ago, when we lived in like a higher flat on a busy main road, and I was looking out of the window onto the busy main road from above, in this 3rd story flat, and there was this girl walking down the street, and she had a black t-shirt and she had on a pale peach leggings and white trainers, and I just kept doing, and she was blonde, and I kept doing a double take because for all that I could see, it was like a disembodied t-shirt moving down the road, and I was like, what? Because she really looked like she wasn't wearing any trousers. All right. That's enough of that. I'm not doing mending stories this week because everything that I've mended is in the wash. So if you've been mending, well done. It's nice to do a section on mending normally, because I feel like it certainly encourages me to get my mending done, and I like hearing about other people doing their mending and coming up with innovative solutions to areas of wear in their clothing. But mine's all in the wash. I did some laundry, so yeah, sorry about that. And let's wrap up with a poem. So conversational threads. So I'm going to read the poem out, and then I'm going to discuss it. So we'll just sit back and relax for a moment. The poem is called What the Angels Left, and it's by the contemporary American poet, Marie Howe. I will put a link to this text in the show notes as well. What the Angels Left. At first, the scissors seemed perfectly harmless. They lay on the kitchen table in the blue light. Then I began to notice them all over the house, at night in the pantry or filling up bowls in the cellar. Where there should have been apples, they appeared under rugs, lumpy places where one would usually settle before the fire. Or suddenly shining in the sink at the bottom of soupy water. Once I found a pair in the garden, stuck in turned dirt. Among the new bulbs, and one night under my pillow, I felt something like a cool, long tooth and pulled them out to lie next to me in the dark. Soon after that, I began to collect them, filling boxes, old shopping bags, every suitcase I owned. I grew slightly uncomfortable when company came. What if someone noticed them? When looking for forks or replacing dried dishes, I longed to throw them out. But how could I get rid of something that felt oddly like grace? It occurred to me finally that I was meant to use them, and I resisted a growing compulsion to cut my hair. Although in moments of great distraction, I thought it was my eyes they wanted, or my soft belly. Exhausted, in winter, I laid them out on the lawn. The snow fell quite as usual, without any apparent hesitation or discomfort. In spring, as expected, they were gone. In their place, a slight metallic smell and the dear muddy earth. From the collection The Good Thief, 1988. So I was introduced to this poem, as I said, in a seminar being held by a contemporary Jewish American poet, and we read a bunch of different contemporary American poets. I think most of them were women. There might have been one man. And we read this poem as a way of talking about metaphor, because in this text, scissors keep appearing and appearing and appearing in this woman's house absolutely everywhere, to a point where her intrigue starts to turn into discomfort and panic. And it kind of starts off with being innocuous, and they arrive in the kitchen, they're in the pantry, they're filling up drawers, they're at the bottom of the washing up bowl in the sink. They kind of start off in places where you might find scissors or knives or other kitchen implements, and then they kind of grow and grow and grow until they're sort of invading the house. They're even underneath her pillow. And in this text, the scissors are a metaphor. I don't know what for. Let me know if you want to hazard a guess. We didn't figure it out in the seminar either. But what really struck me about this text was the fact that the scissors being everywhere was such an odd revelation for this poet. And in fact, it was considered odd for the poet who led my seminar and for a lot of other people in the seminar who were all humanities students, which, by the way, I am as well. I'm doing a PhD in Arts and Humanities PhD. However, my background and training is as a designer maker. So, a lot of the people in the seminar would have done their bachelor's degrees in English, history, classics, geography, maybe the social sciences, that kind of thing, whereas I did theatre design. So for somebody like me, the idea of having scissors everywhere, in every corner, every surface, popping up anywhere that you can imagine, arriving at the bottom of a bag, maybe even on the bed, right? If you have I used to have my studio workshop. I used to make stuff in my bedroom, right? And maybe sometimes I would just shove my toolkit onto my bed for a lack of anywhere better to put them. So for me, there was something very fun about playing with this uneasiness of the scissors popping up everywhere. In the poem, the scissors are a metaphor, but in my life, and this is why I wanted to share it with you guys watching here, scissors are not a metaphor. Scissors are a concrete, very, very useful and safe tool, right? They're safer to use than a knife. I've definitely cut myself with scissors before, but it was fully due to complete carelessness rather than an accident. So that's why I really, really enjoyed the poem, as well as the use of language, which is really why I'm drawn to poetry. The use of kind of rhythm as the sentences run along in the middle of the lines and break off through the stanzas. And the use of things like sibilance, suddenly shining in the sink at the bottom of soupy water. There's something really, really enjoyable about that. And you get the sense of, that pulse through sentences like that. There's lots of S's. Soon after that, I collected them filling boxes, old shopping bags. Every suitcase I owned grew slightly uncomfortable when company came. So there's all of these like harsh consonants. the S's, with the sibilants, with the hard C's as well. So she, in the sort of second third of the poem, she kind of goes from collecting all of these objects that seem to be landing out of absolutely nowhere to feeling like maybe she should try and use them. She feels a compulsion to cut her hair, right, to make a bodily change, but she feels there's some kind of draw in the scissors to stab her. And there is something completely eerie about the image of her drawing out a long bladed pair of scissors from under her pillow, like pulling out a tooth, which again is hinting at this kind of idea of scissors as metaphor and this dreamland. But a metaphor of what? I think it's something about the idea of industriousness, activity in a home, doing something when the scissors are interrupting, her work in the kitchen, in the pantry, washing up and all of that. When she's sleeping, they're interrupting her there. She finds them in the garden. So the scissors are the tools that are turning up in place of other tools. They're in the dirt when there should be a shovel in the dirt, right? So it's all very, very uncanny. And then she lays them all out on the lawn and they disappear. They seem to melt away with the snow. And the only thing that's left with them is the trace of their smell, the metal smell. So in the end, they just totally disappear. And yeah, there's just something really, it is very eerie, isn't it? It sort of feels almost like someone's playing a prank on her, or it's a poltergeist. All of these things are just turning up as if they're taunting her, use me, and she can't figure out how. And the scissors are being seen as destructive, this idea of cutting, of pulling out the tooth, when actually, through the act of cutting, you're also creating things, right? If you think about cutting cloth and shaping things. So the idea of kind of taking away as growing is kind of feels like what's being contested here. So I feel like there's so much ambiguity in that poem, and I would love to know if you have a little read, tell me what you think, and if you have a theory about what the scissors represent. But I've kind of made a few suggestions here. I think ultimately a scissor, it's got so many different uses and purposes. Like I would have an embroidery scissor, different types of cloth shears. I've got scissors in my kitchen that I use for, various different kitchen tasks. You can have like poultry scissors. I have paper scissors that are specifically for paper. I have garden scissors that are for cutting garden twine in the shed. But it's all of this, they all cut away what's extraneous, what's excessive and left over in order to reveal the shape of something useful that is there. So they're very powerful tools that fit in the hand, and it's two sets of blades rather than one, like a knife would be. So I think of them as quite complicated and well-designed tools. I definitely prefer a scissor to a rotary cutter. Those I have injured myself on quite a lot. But yeah, there's something about that well-designed tool that keeps showing up in places that she's not expecting them to, that becomes very uncanny and unsettling. And she doesn't find the right use for them, and it starts to become very sinister. So yeah, let's leave things there. To wrap up this month's episode, I would like to thank again everybody who supports this channel, either on Patreon or by buying me a coffee over on Ko-fi. There's links down below. Thank you so much for contributing to the cost of the Crimson Stitchery, of running it. I've recently done my, accounts for the tax year, and I can, I knew that this was true already, but after doing my taxes and looking at my expenses, it's really thanks to people like you who, enjoying the podcast, the show, and are letting me know that is making it a viable thing to do. I really couldn't do it without you, and I wouldn't be doing it. I'd also like to give a shout out to my Patreon supporters at the Crimson Queens tier, which is the highest level of contributions per month. Thank you so much to Angie Scheitel for your support. I really, really appreciate it. As I mentioned at the top, I've recently been exploring Pinterest. So any tips, any way you like to use Pinterest, anything you think that could work for that, let me know. I occasionally update my Instagram, but I just don't love it as a platform, so I'm kind of trying to explore alternatives. And I've recently been also working on the website, thecrimsonstitchery.com, where you'll be able to find all of my patterns neatly organised and my tutorials, and there's like a blog posts with more direct links for recent show notes and things like that. So do head over there and have a little explore. And yeah, just keep in touch and let me know how you're doing. And if you've got any tips about brioche and any other simple project recommendations are always welcome. I am currently releasing 1 video per month. It's most likely to be a vlog, podcast, and I may work on more tutorials in the future as well. But until then, I hope that you have been well, or if not, that you've been finding some kind of enjoyment and release in making something, whether it's in your kitchen or with a pair of scissors or what. So signing off for this month, and I will see you again at the Crimson Stitchery sometime soon. Take care. Bye.